The only thing that we're interested in is putting money in your wallet. If you want to bet the fights, if you want to have a little bit of action, you are in the right place. With my partner, Ian Parker, I am Brett Okamoto.
We're ready to rock between our parlays, our props, our straight picks. It's time to make money. Let's go.
Yes, sir. It is time for UFC Best Bets for the pay-per-view of June, UFC 275. It takes place in that lovely landscape of Singapore. Look at that city. It looks absolutely gorgeous, and it will serve host to UFC 275, which will see 2 title fights as well as a runback of one of the best fights the sport of mixed martial arts has ever seen between Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Zhang Weili. And we are here to talk about all of it. Hello, everybody. My name is Brett Okamoto, reporter on ESPN reporter for the UFC, for the sport of mixed martial arts, and one of the smartest men I know, Ian Parker, who tells us how to win money every week here on UFC Best Bets. Ian, you've been having a great year, man. A great year of 2022, and that continued last week. Before we get to UFC 275, I want to give you a chance to brag about your performance last week for Alexander Volkov and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Tell us what you did last week.
Well, we started off by hitting that parlay at plus 137, which I was glad to finally get us back on track there. Jeff Molina, finally the judges did us a favor and leaned that way for us. Lonzo Mendenfield and Ode Osborne gave us no sweat whatsoever. But the main event caused us to not have a clean sweep. So 3-1 on the best bets in the parlay. Let's carry that into this week because last week was a lot of fun.
Hey, man, that's 4 hits on the parlay, and then that's 3 of 4. So not good at math, so give me a second. 7 of 8. 7 of your 8 picks there. Cashing for us last weekend in Las Vegas, man. Well done, and let's just keep it right on rolling because you're only as good as your last event, Ian. You were good at this one, but everybody's expecting you to do it again this week at UFC 275. Let's start at the early prelims, which are a quick early prelims. There are only 2 fights on the early prelims. Those start at 7 Eastern on ESPN+. It starts with Jocelyn Edwards taking on Ramona Pascual at 145 pounds. We don't see many 145-pound fights in the female division, but hey, here we are. Edwards 1-2 in the UFC, and Pascual, who was born in Hong Kong. She made her pro debut in 2016. Not a great, jump off the page record at 6-3, but looks like it's going to be a somewhat competitive fight here because Vegas has Pascual at plus 140. Who do you like here?
In this type of fight, you got to look for where the value presents itself. And for me, it's not with Jocelyn Edwards, who's 0-2 in her last fights. And I find her weakness to be when she gets put on her back, which is where Pascual actually is pretty solid and has shown that promise. So for me, Brett, and I know you're going to love this, we're going to start off this card with an underdog. We're going to take Ramona Pascual at those plus odds. If she can wrestle and get this fight to the ground quick, I think she wins this fight. And I'll even take it a step further, wins it by decision.
Whoo, I love that, man. Yeah, you know me by now, partner. When you start off a show, especially with an underdog, it gives me that nice warm feeling, man. I feel like we're in for a nice night of winning money. Okay, let's go from the 145-pound division to the 115-pound division. You got Silvana Gomez Juarez taking on Li Ong-na, 25-year-old out of China. Just her second appearance in the UFC. Both of these ladies looking for their first win in the octagon. Who gets it done?
Well, if you like that first one, you're going to like this one. I also like the underdog here. Reason being is this. We saw Silvana in her last fight. She's got good hands, but the minute it goes to the ground, she gets lost. She actually turned into the armbar the wrong way, and she's fighting someone who's a submission specialist. Silvana's gas tank isn't great. So this fight's definitely not going 3 rounds, which is also very rare to say with the women at this part of the division. But we're going with another underdog here. I like her submission skills. If she can stay away from those heavy hands, I think she gets it done also.
Man, you're spoiling me, man. I will go away for 1 week on vacation. I come back and you start off with 2 underdog picks. Ian, I really like the direction we're headed in. Okay, so I told you it was a quick early prelims. Let's get to the main prelims. That is ESPN 2. They begin at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Some fun fights here to talk about. Brendan Allen, always a guy to keep an eye on. Dana Patrick, he's also another guy to keep an eye on. He's a minus 135 favorite over Kyung Ho Kang. Yeah, some fun fights here in this 4-fight prelims, again on ESPN 2. Let's start with Dana Patrick taking on Kyung Ho Kang, which Kang is interesting to me, man. I mean, he's been around the sport for a while. He's a 15-year pro. He's a big bantamweight. Five of his fights in the UFC have gone to split decision. I think that's just because this guy doesn't do anything exceptionally well, but he doesn't do anything exceptionally poorly either. It makes it kind of, for me, and I'm curious, of course, to get your take, hard to sort of handicap his fights because, as you can see, a lot of them are close. If you got 5 split decisions, going against a guy in Bakaric who has had some very, very quick finishes. He's been finished himself as well. What do you like here? Minus 135 on Bakaric.
Oh, I'm really spoiling you this week. We're going underdog again. And I got some pretty solid reasons why. Not that the other ones haven't been. But with Bakary, here's my thing. I don't really love that he just got knocked out in March and he's coming back and fighting someone that stylistically makes no sense to rush back to. You know, with Bakary, he's got good hands. He's got a lot of power, but he puts everything into it, and then he starts to slow down in the second round, which is what we saw against Gutierrez, and which is probably the reason why he got knocked out. And the guy in Kong, this is someone who is very methodical. He's poised. He can take a good shot and has a good chin. But where the biggest disparity is going to be his cardio. And when the fight goes to the floor, which I lean towards our underdog, and that's why we're going to go with Kong again in this one.
Yeah, I can see it, man. A little bit of danger, of course, with Bakaric. He's always he's a guy who knows how to put guys away. But if he can't early, I agree with you that this thing starts to move in Kang's favor. Let's go from 135 to 185. Brendan Allen, a guy who's only 26, man. This is going to be his 9th fight in the UFC. He's fought really good competition. He's taken on Jacob Malkoun. Look, the odds kind of show that this is potentially a showcase spot for Allen. Is that how you see it? Does he get it done? Does he get a finish here? Or is Malkoun maybe being a little bit overlooked?
A little bit of both here. You know, I think this is an interesting fight that Brendan Allen took, maybe to showcase after fighting Sam Alvey, where he stepped up in short notice and up a weight class. But Malkoun showed us in his last fight, his wrestling, his cardio, that non-stop mentality can play spoiler. For me, I do see Brendan Allen winning this fight. I think he's better everywhere. His training partners over at Sanford MMA, they have phenomenal wrestlers there, so it's not like he's going to be in unfamiliar territory. But for me, I like 2 plays here. I do like Brendan Allen to get the win. Those odds are a little high, so we'll stick him in that parlay later. I also like over 1.5 rounds, mainly due to Malkoun's toughness. I think if he could kind of lean into the grappling and force a lot of clinch work, it'll force Brendan Allen to get that finish later on in the fight.
Okay, so 2 leans there on that middleweight fight. We're taking Brendan Allen. It sounds like you're hinted that he's going to be in your parlay, and then you like the over there. Let's go to the lightweight division. You got Makashita Haitizar taking on Steve Garcia. Haitizar, 22 years old, out of China. He was impressive on the Contender Series alone, but he's taking on a guy in Garcia who's He's got a 12-4 record, so obviously far more experience. He's 30, 8 years more of experience, just life experience and experience in the sport than Haitizar. How much do you weigh that experience? Obviously, you know, when you got a guy coming into the UFC and he's 22 years old, it raises your eyebrow. You want to see the potential in him. Does he have potential enough to get a win here in his UFC debut?
You know, he looked good on the Contender Series, but the opponent wasn't of the highest level, and neither is his other opponents, which is not necessarily his fault, but he's also pretty green still. To your point, Brett, not a ton of experience against a guy in Garcia who has fought much tougher level of competition in the UFC. He's been around longer. He's a little bit older. He's got that maturity in his game. I love Garcia in this fight. I thought he was going to be at least a 2-1 favorite. We talk about the odds, about the value here. I'm surprised he's only this. I'm going with Garcia. I think he's better everywhere. As long as he stays away from brawling, which he's pretty smart most of the time, I think this is going to be a good one for him to showcase his talent.
Yeah, that's a pretty good sell, man. If you think he's going to be, he should have been 2-1. He's better everywhere, like you said, and then also that experience, which we know. I mean, we've just seen experience does matter in the UFC, especially when you're talking about a guy who's 22 years old. The octagon jitters, you talk about all those things. It sort of wraps up into a perfect storm for Garcia, and at a price that you like at minus 170. Okay, let's go to 145. It's our final prelim of the evening. We'll be looking at Shenghu Choi taking on Joshua Kuyabel. Shenghu Choi had a 3-fight win streak, ended in his last fight against Alex Caceres. You know, they're both about the same age, 29, 28. Kuyabel, 1-1-1 in the UFC. How's that for I mean, you can't get a more even record through 3 fights in the UFC. Hasn't fought in a year. What do you think about him as a plus 200 underdog here?
This fight is a real interesting one to me. You know, I go back and forth here because someone in Choi, you know, he lost to Alex Caceres. As he was winning, he almost put him out, and then he got the submission loss. Kuyabel is someone who's just very tough. He's not great anywhere, but he is hard to put away. We saw it against Jalen Turner. I mean, Charles Jourdain, that fight went to a draw. And then, you know, his last fight. So, I mean, for me, I think Choi presents more of the threat to win this fight. I just don't love the odds being that high. I also think this fight goes over as well, just due to Kulabao's tenacity and his toughness. Again, hard to put away, but Choi is a special prospect. As long as he can kind of keep his composure, not blow the gas tank early, he should get the win here.
Okay, so that wraps up the prelims. Let's move to this main card. That main card you can see at 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. You can watch it on ESPN Plus, pay-per-view. And you know what, Ian? This card is just top to bottom. It's fun to talk about from a gambling perspective because we're not talking about a lot of just wide odds. A lot of these odds are very, very close, with, of course, the exception of Valentina Shevchenko against Taila Santos. That is always going to be the case with Shevchenko. However, Taila Santos only plus 450. That number is lower than a lot of the recent women to have fought Shevchenko. Of course, you've got Glover Teixeira taking on Yuri Prochazka in the main event. Zhang Weili, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, that one is super interesting. Cannot wait to hear your thoughts on that. And then 2 welterweight bouts to kick off UFC 275, and that is where we will start it. Very, very interesting welterweight bouts. The first one is Jack Maddalena, versus Khamzat Chimaev. Maddalena, man, I have heard a lot of good things about this kid, and then he came in and delivered in his UFC debut, got a first-round knockout. He's taken on a guy who's a little bit tougher here in Chimaev. I think that this is actually, I'm a little surprised, I guess, by the UFC pairing Maddalena with Chimaev, because Chimaev is just one of those guys I think who can potentially be tough to look good against, and I think there's a little bit of momentum behind 25-year-old Maddalena. He is the favorite here, but not by a ton. He's minus 160, Chimaev at plus 135. Tell me what to look for in this matchup, man.
Well, what's interesting is that Maddalena started off only at minus 105, so obviously people are really jumping on him, and the line keeps going higher and higher. So if you are big on him, get in now because the number is just going up before it goes down. But this is an interesting fight. I'm surprised they're pairing these guys up because what we saw in the Contender Series with Maddalena was he kind of struggled when the fight went to the floor. He almost lost by arm triangle to Anguissa, and in that situation, he was able to defend, get up, and then the striking took over. Chimaev is very dangerous on the ground, but sometimes he gets a little too ahead of himself and he wants to strike to almost prove a point, which to me is kind of silly this early in your career. If your grappling game is where you are at the best, use the striking and get it to the floor. So between these two, I'm leaning towards Maddalena. I think if he could keep the fight standing, his striking is just so much more technical and precise. That jab is one of the best I've seen in a really long time. He sets up his angles perfectly, and Chimaev gets hit a lot. And I don't think he's been hit by someone like Jack Maddalena yet, so we're going that way with Maddalena.
Is this about the highest you would take it? As you mentioned, it's been rolling towards Maddalena. How high are you willing to go and still think that this is the bet you want to take?
I would honestly, you know what, Brett, that's a great question. This number at minus 160 is probably the highest I'd be willing to go, just because also he hasn't been in the UFC that long. He hasn't fought high-level competition or higher-level competition. Chimaev has fought better guys, in my opinion. If it goes any higher, maybe go over 1.5. Chimaev is a very tough guy to put away. So that's how I would kind of play it a little bit. And look, if it goes even higher, I understand if someone want to take a shot on the underdog at Chimaev, because the ground game, if he gets on top, he can smother Jack and cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, hey man, I mean, you can have an opinion on Maddalena at minus 105 and change it completely if the bettors are going a little bit too haywire on him. So might want to. That's one of those you might want to take a look at. Where this line ends up by the time the fight starts. Okay, let's stay in the welterweight division with Jake Matthews versus Andre Fialho. Very interesting fight to me. Jake Matthews has won 6 of his last 8. He's coming off of a loss, but that was to Sean Brady, and everybody has lost to Sean Brady. The guy's 15-0 so far in his career. Andre Fialho, man, he's been kind of taking, I don't want to say he's been taking the sport by storm, but he is definitely making a name for himself. This is his 4th fight, Ian, in 2022. He is a minus 145 favorite here. I have been extremely impressed in Andre Fialho, even though he did lose to Michel Pereira in his UFC debut. But at some point or another, isn't this activity almost a bad thing? I mean, what do you think about 4 fights? Whereas June, it's June, it's not December, and we're talking about the 4th fight this guy has. Do you like this activity, or think it could be a problem for him?
You know what? His last fight didn't last very long. He took no damage, so he was healthy enough to bounce back. And, you know, when you go from training camp to training camp, you don't really have much downtime. If he feels good to do it, and I also trusted his coach, Henry Hooft, if he said, hey, my guy is good, he's healthy, no damage, why not? It's not like he's going through 3-round wars right now outside of the Michel Pereira fight. So for me, this is a very interesting prospect. You know, this isn't someone who just jumped on the scene. He's been in the MMA world for quite some time, but he's finally taken advantage of the opportunities. Even against Pereira, he looked fantastic in his loss. But this fight is an interesting one because Jake Matthews is someone who's been around for a bit, who is good everywhere, will test him across the board. If I'm Matthews, I'm pushing the pace. I'm trying to get Fialho tired, which I don't know if we can. We haven't seen that side of him yet. For me, though, I'm not going against Fialho here. I think his striking, that power, is possibly going to surprise people as one of the top in the division. I mean, literally, he touches you, you go to sleep, and I haven't seen a lot like that in a really long time. For me, I'm going Fialho here. I also don't love Jake Matthews' inactivity.
Yeah, totally agree. Fialho is a guy that I've been hearing about prior to the time he got in the UFC, and he has done nothing for us to. He's everything he does. Just you got to throw more attention on the guy. This could be, unless Matthews just kind of tries to wrestle him the entire time. I agree with you. He could try to set a high pace. This could be a sleeper fight of the night candidate in my eyes. But I don't know if it can be a fight of the night candidate because we have Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk on the exact same card. This is a 3-round fight. Of course, the first one was 5 rounds. It took place in 2020. In March in Las Vegas. Joanna Jędrzejczyk 34, Zhang Weili 32. The first time they fought, Weili closed around -195, around 200, 205, somewhere in that vicinity. So the line has dropped a little bit, as I think you would probably imagine. Right now you're looking at Zhang -165, Jędrzejczyk +140. Of course, the first fight, it almost felt like a coin flip in terms of who was going to win that thing on the scorecard. So it does not surprise me that the line has shifted a little bit in Joanna's favor. What do you think of that, and what were you anticipating the line to open at?
You know, for this fight, it's a tough call. I would have expected Zhang Weili to be the favorite based on activity, based on her close fights with Rose, and due to Joanna not fighting in 2 years. And also, the last time these two fought, Zhang Weili did, in fact, win that fight. You know, the odds are pretty close to what I thought they were going to be. I did think Zhang Weili might have been a bigger favorite. I think Joanna's name will just always carry a number that will never be too far away from anybody, except if she were to fight Valentina again, then we'd see a pretty large disparity there. You know, the first fight was an exciting one. It went all 5 rounds. The amount of significant strikes was absolutely insane. Most for women in UFC fight history, which is no surprise. And it was one of the best fights, I think, in general. Doesn't matter the gender. But for me, Brett, this is where I have to draw the line with, all right, who am I going to pick? How are we going to cap this fight, right? For me, Joanna never took that much time off in her entire career, and there was a lot of damage taken. You can see it in the pictures and the highlights. I mean, the physical transformation, we saw it, was pretty wild. For Zhang Weili, since then, she's fought Rose twice. Close fights both times. Some people thought she won the second fight, despite what the judges may say. But the biggest difference for me in the style of fighting is Zhang Weili's improvement in her wrestling, which she did not use at all against Joanna the first time. So for me, I'm going Zhang Weili here to win this one, and I'm going to say it's going to go to decision, all 3 rounds, no problem.
Super interesting, man. And one quick thing before we get to the co-main event. As I mentioned, you bring up, I like to look back at the odds of the first fight, and try to ask myself what has changed. And so you talk about the layoff of Joanna Jędrzejczyk. You think that actually favors Zhang. One other thing is the change between 3 rounds to 5. I would seem to think that would favor Zhang, right? Because Joanna is a 5-round fighter. We've known that about her over the course of her entire career. So if you've got 2 different variables here from the first fight. You have a layoff that we think is better for Zhang, and then you have the change in the fight itself from a 5-round fight to a 3-round fight, but you actually have closer odds. That to me would say, like, hey, if you like Weili, this might be best bet territory, because everything's sort of kind of trending in the direction of Weili if you liked her in this fight.
I agree. Everything you said is spot on. The 3 rounds, I do think it favors Zhang Weili. For Joanna, if she gets taken down in round 1, she doesn't have 4 more rounds to catch up, push the pace, and try to get Zhang Weili to get into that brawl where she succeeds. So between the 3 rounds, and remember also that inactivity wasn't due to Joanna really being injured, or she just wasn't sure if she wanted to do it anymore. She needed that time to get that hunger, that passion back. This is a very tough fight, and I also think giving her that title implication got her to sign that dotted line and to continue fighting in the UFC. So we're still going Zhang Weili here, and if you loved it before, I think you're getting better odds now.
For sure. Let's move from 2 very, very exceptional female fighters to 2 more of them. Valentina Shevchenko, who very well might be the #1 pound-for-pound female fighter in the world, taking on Taila Santos, who I don't think a lot of people are super familiar with, but the odds makers have loved Taila Santos. So have the bettors. I feel like she has been a significant favorite in the majority of her fights. A lot of times her line is moving up because bettors are coming in on it. Very, very talented, 19-1 record fighting out of Brazil. But hey, she is going up against a challenge that seemingly cannot be beat so far at 125 pounds. First off, where do you see the line moving here? If you like one side or the other, it's usually if you like Valentina, you want to bet it as early as possible, right? And then when you talk about the line movement, what do you think about Taila Santos as an underdog potentially?
The line movement, I don't know if it's going to move that much per se, because we talk about this. Betting at this high number is a very daunting task. You know, you're risking a lot to not win a lot, and not to bring in the whole Amanda Nunes, Juliana Pena thing, but for those that assume that Amanda was going to 100% win and they were willing to take that risk, that's a tough one to swallow. You got someone in Santos here. Look, great athlete, physically very strong. We've seen it against her other opponents. She's been very dominant when it comes to the physicality and her athletic ability. You know, but again, you're talking about someone, Valentina Shevchenko, who, to your point, Brett, best pound for pound. She is someone that, as a champion, as dominant she is, the scariest part is that she keeps getting better, and I really don't think there's any holes in her game. I really don't. You know, people have landed punches on her. She's shaking it off. She's been taken down. She gets back up. For Santos to win this fight, she has to land hard and has to land early. But Valentina is very difficult to hit. She's defensively sound. She just doesn't make mistakes. For me, I like the odds at plus 200 for Valentina Shevchenko to win inside the distance. I just think over time she wears her opponents down, and I don't think this fight's going to be much different. I don't know what Santos brings to Valentina Shevchenko that she hasn't seen already so many times over. So for me, this is going to be another Shevchenko win. You want to throw her in your parlay. The number is not crazy high as it used to be, but I think she gets it done within 5 rounds, and we're getting pretty good odds on that.
Yeah, just a follow-up real quick for you, Ian. I mean, when you look at that graphic of the level of favor that Valentina has been, and you're seeing minus 1,500, you're seeing minus 1,100, you're seeing minus 1,200, okay? And then all of a sudden you get minus 625. Do you almost tell yourself that, heck, hey, it doesn't matter who she's fighting? Like maybe Taila Santos does represent some challenges that these other women don't, but if I can get Valentina Shevchenko at minus 625 when she's minus 1,500 against some of these other females, does part of you think to yourself, like, hey, I don't like paying all those odds, of course, but if you're going to do it, maybe this is the time to do it?
Yeah, if you're ever going to lay the juice that high, this would be the one. It's the lowest I think we've ever seen it since I don't even know, since she was, an underdog to Amanda. You know, look, Santos brings something that I guess odds makers are thinking could challenge because of her record and because of the way she beat JoJo Wood. But, you know, again, level of competition, I think also, and this isn't a knock on the division, I don't mean for it to come off this way, but lack of depth in the division gets you to a title shot quicker, and Valentina has to fight. You can't just let her ride the pine because there's no one to fight. So I'm very surprised the odds are this low. I guess they like what they see out of Santos because she finished her last fight and she's been dominant in the decision wins. I just don't see what she's going to do to Valentina that she hasn't seen before. So, you know what? All those guys like a Floyd Mayweather that likes betting all that money on big odds, this is one he could do. Take advantage of it now with Shevchenko.
Well, and for all of us who don't have Floyd Mayweather money, maybe you do the plus 120 Shevchenko inside the distance. I do like that call, even though Santos has shown a lot of durability during her UFC career. Okay, we got one more to talk about, and it's a big one. It's the main event. Glover Teixeira taking on Yuri Prochazka. And Glover Teixeira, man, there's no other way to say it. When we're talking about it from a betting perspective, this man has been a cash cow since 2019. He's 6-0. He's cashed around, plus 215, plus 200, plus 175, even money. I mean, this guy has not been a favorite too often in the later stages of his career, and he is just making it look easy. In fact, his last 3 wins, you talk about Thiago Santos, Anthony Smith, Jan Blachowicz. I mean, you didn't have to sweat those, man, if you had Glover Teixeira, and those were all at plus money. Here he is taking on Yuri Prochazka, who only has 2 fights in the UFC. Prochazka is minus 200 here. Are we not respecting Glover Teixeira? Can we put some respect on the man's name, or is this just Yuri Prochazka, man? A lot of people were excited when he signed with the UFC, and they envisioned him in a UFC title fight. So is he just where he's supposed to be, and this is his night, or are we overlooking Glover Teixeira once again?
I think the world is overlooking Glover Teixeira once again. Look, with Yuri, I understand he's the shiny new toy, but look at Glover Teixeira. The experience, this guy may be, 42 years old? He's 42 going on 25 in regards to just look where he's at in his career. It's not like he's fighting guys that are washed. He just destroyed Jan Blachowicz. He went in there against Thiago Santos. People thought he was going to get knocked out. In the meantime, he got the fight to the floor after he got dropped and won by submission. And the Anthony Smith fight was a great win. For me, Glover just has that IQ. He knows what he has to do here. And the best thing about Glover that I absolutely love no ego here. He doesn't have to go in there and feel like, oh, I got to knock this out to prove a point. He knows where the disparity is against most of his opponents. He knows where he has the advantage. That's right there on the floor, and that's where he is going to win this fight. Yuri Prochazka is a very talented, athletic samurai warrior. I will give him credit for that. I will call him that because I'm scared to call him anything else. But for Yuri Prochazka, if you watch his last 2 fights, he gets hit a lot. He throws a lot of crazy looping punches, but he leaves himself exposed. And even against Dominic Reyes, he was taken down. But if you get your back taken by Glover compared to Dominic Reyes, you're not getting up and you are getting choked out. I don't see Yuri Prochazka all of a sudden becoming this world-renowned wrestler with takedown defense or being threatening off his back with submissions. So unless he lands a huge one early on Glover, and Glover is defensively a good striker, the chin's not the best, but we know what he's going to do here. So for me, I'm going under 2.5 rounds as our play. But if I have to pick a side, I'm going Glover again at those plus odds.
I love it, man. Yeah, very, very well broken down. I agree with everything. Glover Teixeira, especially when you talk about the IQ. I think Glover Teixeira knows what he has to do to get this fight, where he needs it, where to win it. I mean, executing it, of course, anything can happen out there, but I do think that you can count on Glover Teixeira to have a smart game plan and to not beat himself out there, because Yuri Prochazka is he is dangerous. He's very dangerous. But to offset some of the danger, I think intelligence, that can help out quite a bit, and Glover Teixeira has that. All right, let's go to the parlay, man, because you hit the parlay last week. I love it when you hit the parlay. I think we hit 3 or 4 in a row earlier this year, so it's an opportunity to get on a little bit of a win streak here with our parlays. Where are we going this week?
Well, we're going to start off with Brendan Allen. Again, he is fighting a tough wrestler in Malkoun, but he has seen that type of style before. I just think he's better everywhere. We're going there. Zhang Weili and versus Joanna, I think this is going the distance. I don't see either one finishing the other. So over 2.5 rounds, book it. Valentina Shevchenko, minus 625. Brett, you talked me into it. The number is low enough where it's probably never going to be this low again. We're going to take her on the money line right there. And last but not least, main event. I loved it under 2.5 rounds. I love it even more under 3.5 rounds. And we are getting plus 186 on this parlay.
I like it, man. Plus 186 on the parlay. Okay, moving along to your best bets of the night at UFC 275. What do we got?
Let's start with the main event. I'm going under 2.5 rounds. Whether it's a submission by Glover or a knockout by Yuri Prochazka, I don't see it going any further than 2. So I love that play right there. I am going Zhang Weili over Joanna. As much as I hate picking a side in this fight, the wrestling, the activity, and it being 3 rounds, I think it heavily favors her. I like her to get it done right there at minus 165. On the prelims, we talked about Steve Garcia, the experience, and I still think he is better everywhere. And I like playing against guys that are just coming off the Contender Series. It's a big task to fight someone who's somewhat of a seasoned veteran in the UFC. So give me Steve Garcia at minus 170. Last but not least, we're going back to the well in the Brendan Allen fight. Due to Malkoun's style, due to his defensive prowess, and due to his wrestling, I think this fight does go over 1.5 rounds. So Allen Malkoun over 1.5 rounds, Garcia, Zhang Weili, and main event under 2.5. Those are our best bets this week.
Well, partner, you can tell we've been doing this for a while now, because as we were talking and breaking down those fights, I knew you were going to take Steve Garcia, man. How could you not? I mean, you thought that the odds were off. You thought he was better everywhere, experience. I was like, it's going to be one of Ian Parker's best bets, and absolutely it was. So starting to get to know you. Finishing your sentences before you can finish them yourselves. And then look at us. Look at this chemistry we got going on. So that is going to do it for UFC Best Bets of this week. You can watch UFC 275 this weekend on UFC ESPN Plus pay-per-view. It takes place in Singapore, of course. 2 title fights. Big-time rematch between Joanna and Weili, and those 2 fun welterweight fights. All the prelims up and down ESPN2 and ESPN Plus. Should be a great night of fights and hopefully a profitable night for all of our viewers of UFC Best Bets. That's it. We will see you next week. Take care.